From the far reaches of the Milky Way galaxy, it's Retro Nerd Girl with a film review for you. Today, I'll be reviewing the movie Dracula, released in 1979, starring Frank Langella, Laurence Olivier, and Donald Pleasence. Directed by John Badham. The synopsis is, in 1913, Dracula comes to a Gothic town and sets his sights on the aristocrat Lucy, who is engaged to Jonathan Harker, and so the eternal struggle for Dracula continues. The story. This is an adaptation of Bram Stoker's book, Dracula, released in 1897. The film departs from the book in several ways, but the most common change is the switching of the names of the main female characters, Lucy and Mina. The film follows the 1927 theatrical play, which combined Mina Harker and Lucy Westenra into one single character, named Lucy, and omitted the many suitors that came to ask for Lucy's hand in marriage. The producer of the film, Walter Marish, saw the revived Broadway theatrical production and was so enchanted with what Frank Langella did with the character of Count Dracula, he decided to make the film with Frank in it. The pacing. At an hour and 49 minutes, it really works for me. It's not too long, and it also gives your eyes lots of material to feast on. The challenge. I suppose as always the big bad vampire bat is the villain here, Count Dracula, but I always seem to side with him even in the more scarier versions. Besides being incredibly dangerous, he has a remarkably romantic charm that makes him likable, in fact even lovable. In this film, he is seeking to expand his reach in the world of high society, seeking the company of people who are witty and daring. The sickly Mina Van Helsing is his first victim, as she is called to him when he arrives in the area, being the lone survivor of a shipwreck. He charms the locals, performing a bit of hypnosis on Mina, with slight movements of his hands, while capturing a glimpse of a more interesting prize, Lucy Seward, who is strong-willed, which excites him. Dracula himself is very lonely, dark, and mysteriously cunning, but he is also very passionate about life and admires the living in this particular version. And I do believe that is why he bites Mina in a very different way than he bites Lucy. When he chooses Mina as his first victim, he is simply carrying out his lust for blood, as being a vampire dictates. She is weak and sickly, and such a very easy prey. And in many ways you can say he's also choosing Mina as his bride when he bites her. But when he bites Lucy, he's actually choosing her as his life partner. She's special to him. He allows her to drink his blood, also sharing a part of himself with her. Now the empathy. The empathy portion is really hard for me when it comes to Dracula films because I always really want Dracula to win. I have to face, that truth. But then I have to also realize that he is a killer and these guys are just trying to get some justice for poor Mina's horrible death and also save the life or try to save the life of someone that they love. The Jonathan Harker in this film is probably the most likable version of the character that I've ever seen because he's got a lot of guts and valor. And to be honest, I usually don't ever like this character very much because he's designed to not really pose a great threat to Dracula, but act as sort of a support for Van Helsing. In this film, I actually bought the relationship between Jonathan and Lucy. I really felt like there was a relationship of love there. And he looks visibly angry and jealous of Dracula. And that emotional touch really works to make this character enjoyable. The most important good guy in this is, of course, Professor Abram Van Helsing, which is a marvelous character in any version to me because he's rich with information and gives the audience the most insight about what Dracula is doing and how his bite is affecting his victims. In this version, more than any other, it is through Van Helsing that you feel the devastation of Dracula's actions, as he is not only lending his professional and medical expertise to figure things out, but for Van Helsing, this is deeply personal. Dracula is a monster in his eyes that has taken his precious daughter Mina away from him. The stakes are much higher for Van Helsing in this, and this is an excellent motivation for his character to get a little bit fanatical about destroying him. Lucy is somewhere in between the obvious states of good and evil. She is much stronger than any of the other brides previously on screen for Dracula. Lucy not only falls in love with Dracula, but she protects him and stands up for him, the way I've never heard anyone do that before. I mean, it's through her words that you really finally get to understand what is so lovable about Dracula. She vehemently believes that he's a good and noble man and not a monster. And in an effort to protect him, she manifests her strength into a physical plane when it takes 3 grown men to subdue her. Wow. Dr. Seward is Lucy's father and a supporting character for the others to facilitate access to various buildings and surroundings. Mina is unfortunately the sacrificial lamb in the story, but what happens to her defines the roles of the other characters and how things are going to play out for the rest of the story. Dr. Seward, Professor Van Helsing, and Jonathan Harker bond in a strange brotherhood vowed to stop Dracula after seeing Mina transform so horribly into a monster and having to violently kill her and then dispose of her remains. It was very traumatic for them, and it has brought them to an understanding that they must get rid of Dracula. Now, Lucy is affected by Mina's death, one, because she's a friend, but at the time, she considers her to be her sister bound by Dracula's power. When the group of men kill Mina as a vampire and then dismember her, Lucy considers them all her enemies, even her father. If she had any loyalties to her human life, in that instant, it was demolished. Now, the technical aspects. The Gothic style for this film was impeccable. The interior of Dracula's home, Carfax Abbey, was exquisite with many bat statues, glorious spider webs, candles galore, and it had such a wonderful ancient whimsy about it, like an elaborate tomb that you've uncovered somewhere. It just was so beautiful. The detail put into the set design was just outrageous. It's also so beautifully done and with so much love for the project. Each scene is really a work of art. Dracula's balcony was another piece to it, which was also very elaborate and just looked like someplace from a secluded fairy tale forest. It's just beautiful work there. The cinematography was incredibly stunning, capturing the natural wonder of the beautiful rolling hills, great estates, gorgeous landscapes, and all of the story elements in a way that pays homage to much older black and white horror films. In fact, director John Badham wanted to shoot the entire film in black and white, but the idea was rejected from Universal Studios. However, he found a workaround with the film's color grading, which was just a brilliant way of making the film look black and white, but not quite. That desaturation of the colors was just wonderfully set that really rich gothic mood throughout. Wonderfully done. I loved it. Absolutely. And the thing is that there was a hint of color. Just that little hint of color to let you know it wasn't quite black and white, and that is the beauty of it. The special effects here are very interesting, as there's a lot of detail in the work in the film, but however, the special effects just sometimes felt very dated and then sometimes incredibly remarkable. So it couldn't have been really more obvious in the choices for makeup that was used for the two brides of Dracula. Even though horrifying, Mina's vamped look resembled many of the B-movie makeup effects. It was very interesting because she was only dead for a day, and then as a vampire she looks as if she's been rotting for weeks. However, Lucy's vamped look was hauntingly beautiful and elegant, so she can entice victims if need be. And I think that was a statement about the way Dracula bites the two women differently, as I had talked about before, but now reflected in the makeup. Mina is basically discarded and made to look hideous because he doesn't really value her, and so she has just the basic vampire abilities. And Lucy was his chosen bride who drank his blood, and probably in the drinking of his blood was given many powers that Mina would never have, like possibly powers of illusion. And I thought that was an interesting thing to note about this movie. Also, one of the most talked about and debated dated effects for the film, and no doubt it is dated, was the love scene between Count Dracula and Lucy. In the middle of it is this kind of strange lights show that appears with the use of laser lights. And laser lights were something that was used commonly in the 70s and 80s for an interesting effect. It was like a new thing that happened around the late 70s and 80s that you could find in many music videos and live shows. Now, I didn't mind it, but many people were put off by the scene. However, it was explained by director John Badham in the documentary The Revamping of Dracula to be the proceedings of a kind of vampire wedding between the two characters. I thought that, wow, that is absolutely incredible. I love that idea. Wow, after learning that, it actually became one of the most beautiful moments for me in the movie, because such a thing would be otherworldly and it would be a visual spectacle. And I actually like the way it's presented in the film. I also, it's great to point out it's the only part of the film where there is a bold saturation of color, mainly the color red for blood. Fantastic. I loved it. I know a lot of people don't like that scene, but I do. Because I guess I'm a romantic at heart, and when you say vampire wedding, oh my gosh, my heart melts. Then there is a very, very strange goof in the film. Well, initially it was a goof, but then there was also another workaround with that. And that is when Van Helsing is searching for the undead Mina underground. And he sees her reflection in a deep puddle of water. It was later creatively explained by Badham in the same documentary that prior to the reflection, there was none, until Van Helsing's cross fell into the puddle, thus making the water holy water, which indeed casts reflections on all things. I think it was a very clever contrivance, but I'll buy it, you know. Now to the performances. Frank Langella in this film. Oh my goodness. Of course, he was a natural choice to play the title role of Dracula because the film was conceived during his performance. Well, at least the idea for making the film was conceived during his performance on the Broadway revival in 1977. Now, when he took the role while he was doing the play, he made sure not to play the role as it was iconically represented by Bela Lugosi. He also didn't want to play it like Christopher Lee or any of the other people who had done Dracula before. He wanted to make the character irresistibly romantic and sort of what he calls a gothic hero. And he achieved that, I believe. He took that initial performance from the play and put it on screen. On a side note, the actor Raul Julia took the role of Dracula in the play after Frank left in 1978. Okay, anyway, back to Frank Langella. Like the actor Bela Lugosi, never wore fangs for the role of Dracula, which was one of two stipulations he insisted upon when accepting the role. The second was that he would not do any commercial promotions as Dracula, and I think he was very smart for doing that. In fact, he's never really played that particular role again and avoided straight out horror movies. He didn't want to be typecast as a horror movie actor. And you know what? I didn't miss the fangs, even though they are quite the signature of the vampire's image. Not wearing the fangs really added a sophistication to the character and keeping him pure in a way. Very humanistic, very identifiable. When he dives into a neck, you know what he's doing. And I love that simplistic approach. What also added to the performance was that Frank Langella suffers from an eye condition, which causes one's eye to move involuntarily. It may seem as a disadvantage as an actor, but in this intense role, his wavering stare has another layer to allow his character to emote massive depth and charisma. It's an integral part of his performance that really works, along with his very smooth, velvety voice and his commanding body language. He just uses his whole self to play Count Dracula. And for me, this is one of the best. I could just go on talking about this for another hour. Sir Laurence Olivier playing the role of Professor Van Helsing was fantastic for me, being that I'm such a big fan of his work. I enjoyed his subtle creative touch on this film, giving Van Helsing an accent. Frank Langella said that at the time he was ill with a disease that made him very easy to bleed during the filming. He plays the role with a natural weakness, but it also helped to show how weak Van Helsing was as a human being, in stark contrast to Dracula, who was sort of this super being. It also emphasized that his intellect would be the key to defeating Dracula. Kate Nelligan was quite good as Lucy, bringing a new dimension to Dracula's bride I had not ever seen before in other performances of the character. Her deep voice and timeless beauty also helps to show her sophistication and maturity at so young of age that I understand why Dracula would find her character fascinating and choose her above all others. And she does it so genuinely, and you believe the power of her performance. The best part of the film. Some of the effects, such as Dracula walking up and down the walls of buildings, was so incredible. He takes a moment to just look at the camera for a few seconds, and it just sends these incredible chills down your spine. Having him hang upside down, that was just great. Now the score by John Williams, that was another added element that was amazing to send chills and thrills throughout the fabric of each scene. It's both mysterious, sad, grand when it needs to be. It enhances the moments when his work is presented. I mean, he just knew how to get those violins going at the very right moment to just take your breath away and feel the emotional impact of the scene. And also for me, the romance between Dracula and Lucy is one of the most incredible attributes of the film for me. My wish list. There isn't really anything I could say I would rather see in the film. It's just beautifully done, and I have nothing but like really big glowing remarks to say about this film. The ending. For me, the ending was really great. I mean, when I first watched the ending, I was a child and I really didn't understand it. But I still enjoyed it. Now that I'm an adult, I have a different understanding of it. It left a lot unsaid, and it leaves you wondering, which is the best way to end a wonderful story like this. Lucy and Dracula may meet again one day. After watching the film several times, I noticed one particular scene that kind of slipped through the cracks, which was a scene where Dracula and Lucy talk about him going away and meeting up again one day when the air is pretty much cleared. He says, "You must go on a little bit longer, as you are a creature of the sun, only until we have left behind those who would destroy us. Then you will join me on a higher plane." And I think that part of the film really spells out the ending for you. And it's just beautiful. It just feels like a beautiful romantic story. My enjoyment. The film met with very low box office numbers, as this was one of 7 vampire films released in 1979. Audiences may have been burnt out on the vampire theme to notice this unconventional version of the tale, but to those of us who were mesmerized by the film, we never forgot. Oh, I can't tell you how much I love this film. It's just as simple as that. It's romantic and sophisticated. I've used those words many, many times to describe so many other aspects of the film. It just sweeps you up into the love story of Dracula and Lucy. I saw this in theaters when I was a kid at 9 years old, and I loved it ever since. It just feeds into the female fantasy of being taken over by love. And Frank Langella's version of Dracula is sort of the Don Juan of vampires. But I also hear many guys state how much they love this version of a more romantic Dracula. And I think that the appeal of this Dracula is that he's more of a man who can love deeply than a supernatural beast. His thirst is not just for blood, but for love and life itself. I'm actually so glad so many people still remember this film fondly, because to me, this is one of the best modern adaptations of the book, and one of my very favorite vampire films. My rating is a 9.2. That sums up my review. I hoped you liked it. This is Retro Nerd Girl signing off. Take care, movie lovers. I'm off to my next review.